All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to start off with we're picking up in chapter 14, verses 6 through 13. On this picture, we see the three angels, right? You have the two up here, and then this one over here. There's a couple of things missing because that black is covering it up, but you'll just have to imagine it with me. So we'll pick up three angelic warnings to earth dwellers. And that is verses 6 through 13, if someone wants to read that. Yeah, please.
Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, Fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. Say that again, Tony.
Adulteries.
Okay. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured out full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the parts of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus." Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them."
All right, so we have three angels here presenting different messages, warnings, and it's followed by an encouragement of John to his readers. The first angel is presented in verse 6 through 7. We're told that he has what? The eternal gospel, right? All right, so that's the eternal gospel that's being proclaimed. That leads us with the question, what is the gospel? This is not a trick question, sorry. The good news about Jesus, yeah. So what I have here is the message of God breaking into history through the Son, which is essentially what you said. So same thing, just a little bit fancier, I guess. So this also includes blessings and curses, okay? So anytime God speaks to people, it always is with blessings and curses. So Moses talks to the Israelites, and he says, if you follow, there are blessings, and if you don't, there are curses. Joshua, at the end of his life, will gather the Israelites together, and they will do a blessings and curse. One will stand on Mount Ebal with the curses, and the other one on Mount Gerizim. And the only reason I remember those mountains is because G is good and E is evil. Ebal, curses; Gerizim, blessings. And they repeat the blessings and curses together. And so the gospel is the same way. There are blessings, and the blessing is salvation, but there are also curses. And the curses is if you reject this, there is judgment. And I think that's what we should get when he's talking about proclaiming the eternal gospel. There are blessings and there are curses. He is proclaiming the gospel to the earth dwellers. Okay? My version says those who live on the earth. Maybe you have inhabitants of the earth. I don't know what verse 6 there. Judy, what does yours say? Live on the earth. Okay. This is a technical term in John's Revelation. And earth dwellers are always a synonym for John for non-Christians. Or not, I'll say non-redeemed people. How about that? So if he is proclaiming the gospel to the non-redeemed people, more than likely we're talking about the curses more than the blessings. All right, so again, technical term for non-Christians. He then tells in a loud voice partly what that is, right? Fear God, give him glory, worship him. So 3 parts to that. Fear God. Fearing is always this idea of a natural response of humanity. It's a term of reverence and respect. So recognizing that God is greater than we are and can do whatever he wants. And so that should naturally respond with us respecting him, right? Fearing him. It is also a term of worship in the Old Testament as well. We're to give glory, which carries a lot of the same ideas of being fearful in worship. We're told to worship God because he is creator. This is the theme throughout Revelation. We saw it in chapter 4, right? Like God is presented as creator, and we're to worship him because he is creator. The reason to fear, worship, and glorify God is due to the fact that the hour of judgment has come, right? The hour is now. Judgment is here. The time is short, if you will. All right. The second angel has a different message. What's his message? Yeah, fallen is Babylon. This is judgment upon Babylon. The words that he actually speaks are a combination of 2 Old Testament passages. The idea of fallen is Babylon comes from Isaiah 21:9. But then also Daniel 4:30 speaks about Babylon the Great. And he's great and is punished for his arrogance. Daniel 4 is actually very interesting. That's where Nebuchadnezzar is looking at his city. He says, hey, this is a great city. We are great. And it's kind of an arrogant thing, right? And because of his arrogance, he is driven insane, lives like a wild animal for 7 years. And so we see how a powerful nation can become arrogant and prideful. And like Nebuchadnezzar, when judgment comes, it is not good. Who is Babylon? Oh, wait, no, we won't. We'll wait for a second for that question. All right, Babylon is said to make the nations drink the maddening wine. Okay, and I think this is probably a warning for Christians and others. Okay, even though it is a great city and is symbolic for governments that are opposed to God and God's people, those powerful cities will tend to draw people to them, right? And part of it is a safety thing, right? When people feel safe, they draw closer to that thing that makes them feel safe. Okay, and the problem is we have to be careful with that, because just because somebody makes us feel safe doesn't mean that they are safe people, right? And so what we have here is this warning not to compromise with the world, is what I think we see in this. Fallen is Babylon the Great, who's made them drunk with the maddening wines and joined her in their adulteries. So don't be like them. And I think we see that in John's reflection at the end of the passage. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, if that would mean people flock to the larger cities. I'm glad I live in Mexico.
So I don't know it's a large city, small city thing. It's more of the powerful nations compared to non-powerful nations. So, and I think we see that, right? Like, there's not a lot of people immigrating to Ukraine right now. Right? But we always see a lot try to immigrate towards Europe and America and stuff. Yeah, probably some cheap land over there, if you can prove that you own it, I guess. So that'd be another issue there. So yeah, I mean, power definitely draws people, and it can be a drunkening thing. Like, it can make you drunk with power and stuff. So. The third angel is in verses 9 through 11, and what's its message?
Anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury. Yeah, so it's another judgment and warning, I think, right? So to worship the beast and receive its mark is something that was talked about at the end of 13, right? The beast of the sea
comes in with the mark 666, the number of that mark, and those who take on that on their hand and forehead, they are able to trade in commerce and all that stuff and have protection. All right, so we'll go back to that protection thing. But he says, if you receive that, if you worship the beast, receive its mark, you result in judgment, which is the wine of God's wrath, which we'll talk about in the next vision that we're about to read once we get done with this one. It says that they will drink an unmixed or a mixed unmixed portion, which is a very interesting phrase. So oftentimes they wouldn't give you wine straight. They would usually dilute it in some way in the ancient world. I think you talked about, I forget where, probably in our men's group, how wine cellars would do this, but they would even cut it even more than normal. So in 2 Corinthians, Paul mentioned something to that effect as well. And so here God is not going to mix his wrath, right? He's not going to cut it. So if you worship the beast and receive his mark, you get an unmixed or a mixed unmixed is what the phrase is. The full wrath is how it's translated. It's the best way to translate it. We also probably could see the permanent results here to God's wrath, God's wine, compared to the wine of Babylon, right? And I think that's probably what's being played, why he says the mix unmixed portion, right? Babylon's making you drunk with her wine, but God's wine is permanent. So like you can go to Babylon, you can worship the beast, you can receive its mark, but all of that stuff is going to have short-term effects compared to God's long-lasting effects. Okay, and so the judgment that's coming is going to be eternal is kind of the concept. All right, and so I think we have a play on words between the two angels. Okay, so what are those consequences? What are some of the things it says? Yes, yeah. Torment. Torment is probably psychological, not necessarily torture. Okay, although it can be torturous when you're in a psychological issue, right? And so it's a psychological thing here. What else? Yeah, fire and brimstone, burning sulfur is what we have. This is again common language for judgment. The idea of smoke also notes an idea of remembrance. Okay, so smoke before the altar of God is a remembrance of God for the prayers of the saints. Smoke is a remembrance thing that this thing is happening. So it's an ongoing punishment. For those who suffer such an end, there is no rest. And that's going to be contrasted in just a little bit where we're told that there is rest in Christ. Okay. We also told that it's done in front of the Lamb and somebody else. I put a thing there. And his angels. There we go. In front of the Lamb and his angels, which kind of notes that there's probably vindication. All right. When judgment happens, we get to see it. And it's a vindication thing that what we have committed ourselves to is true. And that's something that we see throughout the New Testament. And so they rejected God, Jesus and his offer of salvation, which is found in the eternal gospel, which is preached by the first angel. And because of that, they receive, they get on full display that was true, that they should have listened, but they didn't. Okay? So I think that's what we kind of see in this judgment passage. Verse 12 begins a reflection, a theological reflection on what has just been seen by John, and I think a warning as well. And so the first thing that he says is this calls for patient endurance. All right, so you need to have patient endurance. And so while it might seem safe to compromise with the world, why it might in the moment you might gain something, whether it's security or economic gain or whatever, in the end, it ends badly, right? If you take on the mark of the beast, you will receive the full wrath of God's fury, okay? And so you need to keep instead the commands of God and be faithful to Jesus, right?
It will never be good to compromise with the world long term. I mean, if you look at it and think it's temporary, I don't think if it's for the
So here's where I'm at: is why are churches allowing drag shows and cross dressers and all these things be preaching in their thing? Like churches, I mean, in the last year we've seen churches kind of go nuts. Why are they doing that? And the reason they're doing that is because they're compromising with the world so that they don't get the vindication of the world against them. Who gets the wrath of the world? It's the Christians. So you had this school shooting this last week, right? And almost instantly the response was, well, that church didn't pray enough. That's the reason why it happened. I was thinking about reading that article that just listed off all the ways in which it was all kinds of people. It was all over the place. Like, and they said different things, but essentially, like, one of them was like, it shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry those kids died, but the reason why it happened is because that church is a conservative church. That church spoke against her, and the hurt that she had as a kid is the reason why she went and shot those kids. So it's our fault that it happened.
Well, the evil one is going to always do that.
Yeah,
Raise up somebody.
right. But they're not going to say that to the churches that are compromising with them. The churches that are accepting and allowing it in, they get an advantage in the world. That's what and it's short gained, and I think that's what you see in the wine of the Babylon, right? It's a temporary gain, but the long-term punishment is worse. And so what John is saying, you need to have patient endurance. Yeah, people are going to call you out for what you believe, but it feels like temporary gain. You're right. It's not temporary gain in the eyes of God, but it's temporary gain in the eyes of the world. And if I wanted to have a big church, I could probably preach a health and wealth gospel because that's what our world wants to hear.
Yes, I understand that. I just think if the Holy Spirit is telling me, no, don't do this, then I better abide by that.
Absolutely. And what John is trying to do for his audience is we read those letters. I know it's been a while. We read those letters a couple months ago, but some of those churches are doing just that, like ignoring the Holy Spirit so that they can not endure the persecution that they're facing in that moment. And so that's really the choice. That's the choice in Revelation. And I think if there's one thing you should get out of this whole book is that we can't compromise with the world to escape it. Right? Like you either endure the persecution and find eternal rewards, or you compromise with the world and find eternal judgment. Like those are your choices that I think Revelation is being presented to us over and over and over again. And yeah, it looks like the world's winning, but even though Babylon looks like it's winning, and we're going to see that in a couple of chapters, it looks like they're winning, but in the end, they don't. And so it's really it's the choice you have. Are you going to follow the way of the world, or are you going to follow the way? What's that?
Are we currently in this chapter?
Absolutely. Well, I think we can go to any. I feel like any chapter of Revelation can be applicable in most times, because John is really wanting his people to understand we win in the end. So have patient endurance, be faithful, follow Jesus, listen to the Holy Spirit, like do the things that you called to do. And yeah, at times it sucks. This world, when I read those articles, I just get angry, and it's a righteous anger. I feel like, right? Like, how dare you blame this on us? How dare you?
Your nasty world you love.
Yes.
Woman blind.
I think when we are so focused on trying to figure out what her motive was, we are ignoring what we need to be doing. That to me, no one knows really what her mind was all like.
Now, supposedly, I haven't read the letter because they haven't released it, because I'm afraid they don't want to release it because I'm afraid of what it says.
And said enough to this friend.
Yeah.
They indicate this was something that she had planned out.
Yeah. Well, they found like maps. She had drawn out hand maps. So anyway.
I think that shows how far the evil one.
And so here's where I'm at is for us to call out sin, to tell our world that it is broken, that's nothing wrong for us to do that. For people to lie to people and say you are perfect the way that you are, that's the real problem. And we're unwilling to really address the issues because we're unwilling to say that something's wrong with somebody. I mean, that's the issue with this whole situation. But again, I think what John definitely wants us to not be as churches that are compromising just to escape being targeted or whatever. Because had that church been super accepting and said, oh yeah, it's okay, she would never have shot it up. Never would she have done that. But it's, yes. Yes. Exactly. And that's something that, I think that's what John's churches are dealing with, right? The church, I took out my notes, so I can't go there. But when we look at those churches, the churches that are facing the harshest persecutions are the ones that are being the most faithful, right? So I think there's two in the middle. So Smyrna, good church. Yeah. So I think Smyrna is a good one, right? So he says, I know your affliction and your poverty, yet you are rich. Chapter 2, verse 9. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you a crown of life. So one of the most faithful churches is facing the harshest persecution, right? Then you got Philadelphia is the other one. Verse 8 of chapter 3, I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have a little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews but are not, but are liars, I'll make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming upon the whole world and test those who live on the earth. Right? So the two churches that are faithful, they're the ones facing the harshest persecution. So as Alicia said, they're going to attack the faithful churches. And so I think if anything, what happened this past week shows that particular brand of Presbyterian, not every Presbyterians, but that particular brand of Presbyterians might be doing something right. Because they're the ones that were attacked. So, Matt, you came in the middle of all that, so you look kind of confused there for a second. So, anyway, that's what I think. I think it's very tempting to compromise, and I think it's because we don't want to face persecution or in whatever form that looks like. I think people don't want to face that, and so if I can escape it by, in our case, in our world, by accepting this lifestyle and not saying it's wrong, then I can do that. And then I don't have to endure that stuff.
Especially if it comes to your kids.
Oh,
that
yeah.
is going to be the hardest.
Yeah, for sure.
Just take me out.
Yeah. Don't touch my kids. Yeah, for sure. All right, verse 13 is a warning, I think. He says, being faithful might result in death, right? Blessed are those who die in the Lord, okay? And I think that's a warning. You might die, okay? But there is blessings, and the blessings is rest. Okay, so that third angel, right? Day and night, there is no rest. And so if you really want rest, the true rest comes when we are in the presence of God, all right? And if we're trying to find rest anywhere else, it will not end in rest. Okay. And then the last thing says, just that rest is, I think, the blessing there. Okay. What do we learn from these verses?
Be thou faithful.
Yeah.
Be faithful to the Lord and don't compromise.
Yeah. I said, the faithful are promised a rest that is not given to the rest of sinful humanity. Therefore, we should not compromise to find peace in the world now. Okay, let's turn to the next vision, 14 through 20. This is a short one, sort of.
I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a crown of gold on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and weep before the Lord, to reap what has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth and gathered its grapes and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia.
All right, this is where I wish I could show the full picture. There's actually a wine press here with an angel stepping on the grapes of wrath and wine of wrath, and yeah. So I picked this picture because it did the best for the whole chapter. So, this is the third vision of chapter 14. We in the first vision, it talked about the 144 being the first fruits. And we talked about what that kind of hinted at. It definitely hinted at a future harvest, and now we get that future harvest. And we just have to kind of ask, what type of harvest is it? So, verse 14, we are returning back to a vision of Jesus. I think we can safely assume that the one seated on the cloud is Jesus for a couple of reasons. First, we can assume it's Jesus because white clouds are only ridden by God and the Son of Man in Daniel. So God throughout the Old Testament is riding on a cloud. The Son of Man in Daniel rides on a cloud. And so the Son of Man being Jesus, we can assume that this is Jesus as well. Additionally, what is on his head? Yeah, a golden crown, right? So again, that is a depiction of royalty. And so we assume that it is Jesus as well. So I think we can safely say that. Added to this picture of him riding on a cloud and having a crown is a sickle. This is used to harvest things. It's the image of harvesting. And harvesting typically is a discussion on judgment. So anytime Jesus tells a parable that includes harvest, it is always a judgment, final judgment parable. Okay? All right, verse 15 through 16 is kind of interesting. An angel comes from the throne of heaven and comes and tells Jesus, now is the time to harvest. Why would the angel have to tell Jesus this? Yeah, so Jesus actually says this in the Olivet Discourse. He says, only the Father knows the end time, right? Neither the angels in heaven nor the Son of Man. And so we would call this maybe, okay, so I have some questions here. Maybe this is because Jesus is still subordinate in function. Not that Jesus is subordinate to God, but he functionally is subordinate, right? So like he says, he humbled himself in Philippians 2. And so how does that work out? We don't necessarily know. It's not fully explained, but maybe it's a functional subordination. I also have on here, maybe the angel is speaking more for John's information, right? Jesus already just knows this. That's why he's there. Maybe the angel is just letting John in on the information. Either way, the time is now is what we have here. So we have a vision of end time judgment. Okay. The earth is harvested. Does this passage have two harvests or one? And that's a question we have to kind of figure out. So we have a vision where the Son of Man is harvesting, and then angels are harvesting and harvesting grapes of wrath. So are these two separate harvests or one harvest that's repeated? And that's really what we have to kind of figure out. and here it changes how we interpret this, okay? If it is two harvests, then the harvest of Jesus is probably the harvest of the righteous, right? He's gathering those who have been faithful. If it is one, what we have is just a repetition to explain the terrible nature of judgment. And so anytime you repeat something twice in a row, it's just emphasizing how bad it is in this case, or how good it is, depending on what's being envisioned here. So I don't care which one you do. I'm just giving you the two options and what they mean, depending on how you want to do it. So verses 17 through 18 actually retell Joel 3:13. And so you can look that up. I'm going to read it here. It says, Joel 3:13 says, "Swing the sickle, for the harvest is right. Come, trample the grapes, for the winepress is full, and the vats overflow. So great is their wickedness." Interestingly, if you read it in the Greek, the Septuagint, they actually have sickles, plural. Okay, in the Hebrew, it's one. In the Greek, it's two. And so this is why some people say maybe it's the same harvest, because maybe it's just a play on Joel 3:13 in general. All right, because in Joel 3:13 it says, "Come, harvest, for the time is now." That's what happens with the Son of Man, and then the trampling of the grapes is this second vision that starts here in verse 17 through 18. So we do have in these verses a near repeat of what happens in 14 through 16. You have an angel with a sickle, somebody with a sickle, I should say. Then you have an angel come and declare, "Now's the time," and then there's a harvest. So like it's repeated almost idea for idea, if not word for word. So again, we could either have one or two harvests. I don't really care. It's up to you, however you want to read it. So verse 19 through 20, again, repeating this idea of the wrath of God being expressed in the grapes metaphor. Crushing of grapes is another common theme of judgment in the Old Testament. The winepress takes place outside of the city. And so then we're left with the important question, which city? Okay, that's an option. So in Revelation, there are only two cities that are spoken of at length. One of them is Babylon, and the other one is New Jerusalem. Yeah, not the earthly city, but the heavenly city. So those are our two options. If it's Babylon that's being talked about, then this is a crushing of Christians, so persecution. I don't like that option, so I go with the second one, which is New Jerusalem, because I think it fits it better. And so if we're talking about crushing of grapes outside of the New Jerusalem, then we're talking about a judgment against unrighteous humanity. And so I kind of lean towards that interpretation. I think it fits better. The very end of verse 20 has a couple of common tropes of judgment severity. The first is this idea of blood coming to the horse's bridle. That is typically used and spoken of in biblical literature and Jewish literature as well, for there's being lots of death. Lots of people are dying, right? If blood is flowing that high, a lot of people are dead. Okay, so this is a severity idea. Okay, the second one is the 1600 stadia. That is an interesting number for several reasons. First, anybody know what the distance from Tyre to Egypt is? It's actually really close. That's close. It's 1,664 stadia. All right, so maybe John rounds that out, and so what we have here is basically the promised land being the imagery there. That's how, I don't know. I think that is probably being too specific for what we get with numbers, although it is interesting. So I think what we have here is either 4 squared times 10 squared, which is the complete judgment of the entire world. Okay, 4 being a world idea, complete world. 10 is a completion number, or 40 squared, which says pretty much the same thing, a complete judgment. 40 is usually a term of judgment. So you have like Noah's ark. How long were they there? 40 days and 40 nights, so a judgment image. Okay, so either of those, I think these are both saying the same thing. just slightly differently. But they communicate the same idea. So I lean towards that more than the Tyre to Egypt thing, which is it's fascinating. 64 stadia off. I'm sure your Bibles tell you what that distance actually is.
Maybe it is a picture of us going to the promised land also.
It could be, yeah. No, I have no problem with that. I think it's maybe too specific if it's really going in that route. So definitely, because judgment ends in us in the promised land, right? So, all right, that was a short one. What did we learn? There's going to be a harvest. Yeah, I have judgment comes. I have as on here for some reason at God's appointed time, and I think that's what we see. The angels both come and say, "Now is the time. Now is the time." And so I would almost say for us as Christians, we don't need to worry about that. It will come when it comes, when God says it comes, and we need to be faithful. Just know that it is coming, and that can give us reassurance and hope for that future. Okay. Let me see how I have this. Okay, before we jump into the next couple of verses, we need to look at some literary functions. Here's my picture, the glorification of the Lamb and the saints, and you have a bunch of harps. We need to look at the literary overview of the last couple of chapters that we've read. And what's interesting is from chapter 12:1 through 5:4, we have a series of 7 visions, okay? Those visions go as following. The women and the dragon, that's chapter 12. Then chapter 13, you have the dragon and the beast of the sea, as well as the dragon and the beast of the land. Then in chapter 14, you had the lamb and the unblemished 144,000, the angelic warnings of coming judgment, which we read today, and the harvest of the earth, which we read today. And it is followed by this one, which is the victory of the saints, I think is the best way to view this last vision. So all 7 of these visions are kind of working from beginning to end, right? What started in chapter 12 is coming to a conclusion in verse 4 of this chapter. And it also fits nicely with John's theme of 7, right? Like you had 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and now 7 visions of the spiritual battles that are taking place, right? And so we kind of see some of that working out. It will be followed by the 7 bowls. There is an interlocking verse, which we talked a little bit about when we got to the seals. We'll just have to talk again. So, if someone will read verses 5 or 15, verses 1 through 4.
And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who had come off victorious from the beast and from his image, and from the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of God. And they sang the song of Moses, the bondservant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are thy works, O Lord God the Almighty. Righteous and true are thy ways, thou King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou alone art holy. For all the nations will come and worship before thee, for thy righteous acts have been revealed.
Okay. So one of the things that we have is an interlocking feature in verse 1. And we actually we've seen this happen a couple of times in Revelation, where an idea is introduced, then it disappears for a second, and then comes back. So at the 7th seal, you had the introduction of the trumpets, and then the rest of the seal, and then the trumpets came back, right? So it's kind of an interlocking. So I almost like a loop. It loops, and the actual 7th vision is 2 through 4 here, and it's pointing backwards to what's happening here. We also see other features like that. So right now, this idea of Babylon the Great that we just read today, right? That talks about getting people drunk with wine of her adulteries. Like that's a weird verse to kind of randomly throw in there, and when we get to chapter 17, like it makes so much more sense. All right, and so what it is almost a feature that operates in some of the same way as this interlocking verse. So we do need to treat verse 1 kind of separate from the vision. Okay, so we're going to have verse 1 and then the vision, which is 2 through 4, that goes with the 6 other visions. Okay, all right, so this is interlocking. We are going to see a connection from the previous 7 visions to the next 7 visions, which are the bowls, and that's how these interlocking verses work. The plague is called the last plague, and we do have to kind of ask why would it be called the last plague? As I put it in parentheses, last. Okay. Ideas. What are your ideas? Okay, yep. Completion of God's wrath. Why does he, I mean, yeah, we got that idea, and it's kind of playing on what's happening elsewhere. I guess let me just kind of explain the options here, and then we'll go from there. Maybe it's last in time. We're talking about final judgments. There's a lot of people that take it that way. Definitely if you're a futurist, right? The problem with a futurist saying these are the very last things that happen in world history is that you have 17 through 19 that happens, and we have to kind of explain what's going on there as well. I think we probably should view this as the last because it's the last of the visions of judgments. You're going to have 17 through 19, but they're going to be kind of individualized judgments compared to basically once you get to chapter 17, you have to tell what happens to Babylon and those who follow her and the beasts and the dragon, right? And those kind of happen through 19 through 20 or 17 through 20. And so this is more of what's happening to the earth dwellers, the general population of unredeemed humanity. And these are the last of those visions that John gives. I think you could also say maybe a combination of these two ideas. These bowls are definitely finality, and there is an end, and maybe the last of what's happening in the world whenever they appear, whatever that looks like. I think that's probably a safe way to approach it. A combination of last in time and last in visions. That's all I kind of want to say there for that verse. We'll talk about the bowls next week once we dive into the rest of chapter 15. Verses 2 through 3, the first part of 3, we come back to heaven again, and I think we see that because of the sea of glass, right? Where do we see the sea of glass? Yeah, in the throne room of heaven in Revelation 4, okay? Also, in this next to the sea of glass are the lampstands, right? And so you have fire and the sea of glass together. And so you have that right away, right? The sea of glass glowing with fire, okay? Standing next to the sea are the victorious saints, right? Those who are victorious over the beast and his image and over his number, right? This is who we're talking about. They've overcome the beast and his image, which comes and the number which comes in Revelation 13. They are given harps, which is something we saw in Revelation 14:1, given to the 144,000, which I think emphasizes that the 144,000 are redeemed humanity. All right, they're the same group of people. And they're going to sing a song. What is the song that they sing? The Song of Moses and of the Lamb. Okay, one song, not two different ones, but Song of Moses and the Lamb. Does that remind you of anything? Saved humanity standing next to a calm sea singing a song. Yeah, good job. All right. The Red Sea. Yeah. So at the very end of the Exodus, right, the Israelites have just crossed the Red Sea. The Red Sea's won a victory, right? God wins a victory through the Red Sea, and there is God's people standing next to it, and they sing a song. And it's the Song of Moses, right? Great and mighty are you, Lord. Who is like you? All right. Now, here at the end of time, the saints will sing a song next to a sea as well, right? The sea of glass. And again, the sea of glass is this idea of a calm sea because it's in the presence of God. God's presence calms the sea, right? And so you have that, and they're singing a song. And so we have this heightening connection between the Exodus account and Revelation. And when we get to the bowls, what you're going to have are the judgments of Exodus repeated. Okay, so it's kind of a foreshadowing of what's to happen. Their actual song comes in the second part of verse 3 and verse 4. It is a series of quotes and allusions to a variety of Old Testament passages. And all of those passages are dealing with Exodus. Okay, so again, if we missed it with the idea of standing next to the sea singing the Song of Moses, we should get it from recognizing the Old Testament passages. So Deuteronomy 28, 58 through 60 is the first part. The Israelites are told by Moses that if they do not revere the glorious and awesome name of the Lord God, then they would suffer the same judgments as Egypt, which again is about what's about to happen. You also have Psalm 111, 2 through 4, which speaks about God providing for his people. And in particular, the thing that they were provided with was the promised land, which again is the idea of Exodus. We're leaving Egypt to go to the promised land. Deuteronomy 32, 4 says that God's ways are perfect and just and without wrong, okay, which is very similar to the last phrase there, verse 3, which says that God's ways are just and true. Verse 4 alludes heavily to Jeremiah 10:7. Where in Jeremiah 10:7 he says, "Who would not fear you, O King of the nations?" And the question in Jeremiah 10 and Revelation 15 both expect the same answer: no one. No one would dare not fear you, right? Then you have this idea in Psalm 86, 9 through 10, which says the nations will come and will worship God, all right? And so what we have to understand is that at the end of time, everyone will worship God. And so you get a choice now. Are you going to do it by compulsion? All right, when Jesus appears, every tongue in heaven and on earth will declare that Jesus is Lord, right? We'll bow down before him. We'll worship him. And so we get the choice. Will we worship him now, or will we be forced to worship him when he appears? Right? That's kind of the idea throughout all of this. And then Psalm 98, 2 notes that God revealed his righteousness before the nation. And the exact context, while unknown in Psalm 98, does speak of the idea of God's right arm and holy hand working for salvation in 98:1. And where else do we see that God's hand works for salvation? In Exodus, right? So God says, I am stretching out my arm to bring the Israelites out, right? I'm stretching it out and rescuing them. And so we definitely see that Exodus there as well. So every quote comes from a passage dealing with Exodus. So throughout the whole song, we see the idea that God's salvation is given through his just actions. And so the judgments that have been mentioned through this couple of passages that we just read today, those are just. They might seem harsh to us. The idea of blood coming up to the horse's bridle, extending for 1,600 stadia, that seems harsh, but it's just because sin needs judgment. Okay, sin requires judgment, and so God is right and holy in dealing with sin and sinners. And when salvation is fully realized, we will find ourselves celebrating and rejoicing that our God is just and true and redeemer. All right, so what do we learn here? Or what can we learn?
We win.
We win, yeah. God provides victory. We win for his people, and all will worship him as a result. So we win, and the world will see it. We'll be vindicated, and they will worship because of it.